The city had folded into its midnight hush when the elevator opened to the 49th floor and spilled a long, cold blade of light across the marble. Adrian Vale stepped out, coat collar raised, the glass and steel corridor mirroring his measured stride, and the fatigue wedged beneath his eyes. The winter wind pressed against the windows like a restless sea. He preferred nights like this building empty, corridors echoing to think without anyone hovering, but the sound that stopped him wasn't the hum of the servers or the distant growl of traffic. It was a stifled sob. He turned the corner toward the executive boardroom and saw her, a cleaner in a gray uniform, on her knees beneath the edge of the conference table, knuckles white around a spray bottle, eyes closed hard, as if that alone could hold the rest of her together. A limp garbage bag lay at her side like a deflated shadow. Tissues bloomed like defeated flags around her, half moons of water on the wood, testifying to efforts she had made to tidy even her grief. A small phone glowed in her palm. "Please," she whispered to no one, or to everyone. "Please hold him. I'm on my way as soon as I finish. Tell Mateo I love him. Tell him I'm still here." Adrian didn't make a sound. He was practiced at invisibility, at folding into the quiet, the way a blade slips into a sheath. Yet the words pulled like a thread. He knew the cadence of worry, the way it coats a voice and makes it almost prayer. Once, long ago, his wife's voice had trembled like that knocking on a hospital window, and because memory was a ruthless creature, he stayed quiet and watched a second longer than he should have. The cleaner swiped her cheek with her sleeve and scrambled to her feet. When her gaze collided with his, a heartbeat passed hers, shocked and raw, his flat and unreadable. She straightened the hem of her uniform, tucked stray hairs behind one ear with hands that trembled, and dropped her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, and her voice did its best to climb out of its shaking. "I didn't realize anyone was here. I'll be done in a minute." He noticed small things, the fray on the cuff, the bottle labeled vinegar and water, not company-supplied chemicals, the sign of someone buying her own materials to stretch a paycheck. On the table, a smear of frosting shaped an accidental heart, a fragment of some earlier celebration. He could smell citrus and fatigue. He sharpened his expression until it could cut. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mara," she said. "Mara Santos." "And the call." He nodded toward her phone. "You were—" Her chin lifted a fraction. A quiet act of defiance, or simply a decision to be seen. "My son has asthma. He had an attack. The neighbor is with him. The ambulance is. They're on their way." The words came like stones trying not to roll. "I'll finish this floor and go." Something inside him, that small, old splinter of compassion, throbbed. He pushed it away. "Finish the floor," he said, "then go." She nodded and turned to the table, working with ferocious efficiency now, as if the speed of her motion could shorten the distance between her and whatever was happening across town. The windows pressed in with their silver darkness. The city's night pulsed with horns and sirens. One siren rose above the rest and swam closer, and though it could have been for any stranger on any street, it reached into the room and held. Mara closed her eyes again for 1 second, just one, and then she kept moving, wiping the last crescent of frosting, collecting crumbs, smoothing the world to make it ready for the morning rich. Adrian stood there, the master of a world that obeyed his keystrokes and signatures, and felt how little command mattered when grief or fear pressed its thumb to your sternum. He should have left. He should have gone up to his penthouse office and opened the spreadsheets, that told him which companies lived or died by breakfast. Instead, he said, "What hospital?" Her answer was soft. "St. Bartholomew's." He nodded once. "I know the head of pediatrics." It came out colder than it felt, as if he were bartering instead of offering. "Go." He gestured at the door. "I'll have someone finish this floor." Her mouth opened. Gratitude, apology, pride, all stuttered together. "Thank you," she said, and the two words tasted like relief and failure at once. She collected her bag. The phone buzzed again. She flinched. "I'm coming," she whispered into the night and pushed the elevator button as if summoning mercy. The doors swallowed her. He stood as the building's hum returned. Somewhere deep in the servers, a blue light blinked like a tired heartbeat. He pressed his fingertips to the table's edge, where tears had darkened the wood, and felt the faint damp. When he finally turned away, the city's siren was already fading into the cold. Adrian Vale had built empires out of impatience. Vale Systems, the raven black tower with his name like thunder across the skyline, had grown from a basement startup into a multinational organism that breathed data and exhaled influence. He was 42, angular, a man forged in the white heat of ambition and cooled by misfortune. Photographs, those that circulated on magazine covers and finance sites, caught him in immaculate suits, jaw tight, eyes like winter. The only photo he kept hidden was smaller his wife, Lila, laughing behind a blown dandelion, her hair a restless halo. She had died 3 winters earlier in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and rain. On the anniversary each year, he sent a donation to St. Bartholomew's and watched the receipt come in like a sterile obituary. He lived half his life in Glass A penthouse office with a view of the river's iron spine, a home overlooking the park where people who had time walked dogs that did not understand the cost of rent. He could have anything except rest. Even his son Theo, 6 years old and brittle as a matchstick, was mostly a quiet presence in a home tended by professionals. Theo's therapist said grief had made a nest in him. The boy liked to line up toy cars in meticulous rows and lean against windows as if listening for a weather report only he could hear. Adrian did not know how to reach him without breaking both of them open. He told himself efficiency was kindness better, a competent nanny, than a father who fumbled the language of lullabies. He told himself clean floors, full fridges, and the best doctors were love translated into logistics. It was easier to balance a company than a child. He could scale a business. He could not scale a human heart. Mara Santos lived 17 subway stops away in an apartment that smelled like cumin and soap. The walls thin enough to hear her neighbor's television. If you looked at her life from far enough away, it was manageable 2 second-grade twins, Lucia and Matteo, with their mother's less stubborn smile, a bulletin board calendar dotted with color-coded shifts, office tower at night, bakery at dawn on weekends. A plant her daughter insisted was named Clementine because it had survived an entire winter like a small miracle. But up close, there were frayed edges everywhere. A landlord who raised the rent by $40 and shrugged. An inhaler count on the fridge, a folder of hospital bills, stapled like some cruel art project, swelling with monthly interest. There was pride, too, arranged beside the anxiety Lucia's drawing of a city with a heart bigger than the moon. Matteo's school certificate that said, in cheerful font, excellent effort. Mara had once dreamed in bigger colors. She loved chemistry in high school, loved the clean logic of compounds, the way things bonded and broke. She had planned on a lab coat and a name embroidered above her heart. Then life had broken all at once. their father gone with a whispered apology and one grim suitcase, her mother's hips failing. 3 jobs that kept the lights on but vacuumed the future empty. It's a season, she told herself in the beginning. Seasons pass. But some seasons settle in the body like weather. On the night Adrienne found her crying, the twins were with their neighbor, Mrs. Rivera, a widow with a singing kettle, and the firm belief that strangers were just friends in need of soup. Mateo's asthma spiraled whenever winter whipped the air dry. And tonight the cold had gnawed his lungs. The ambulance had come. Inhales too tight to count. Mara scrubbed the boardroom table with the automatic movements of a person who needed every hour to translate into groceries. Rent. Medicine. She would finish this floor. She would sprint. She would hold her son and breathe for him until he remembered how. Between these 2 lives ran an elevator shaft and a city, but also a fault line. Adrian's office, on the morning after Mara left, gleamed with that particular cruelty of the rich world, first thing sunlight spilling gold across a desk that would cost a year of someone else's wages. Coffee brought in cups so thin the heat kept its manners. His assistant, Irene Park, briefed him in clipped, efficient phrases. CFO wants an early touch base. The prototype demo is tomorrow. Security flagged an anomaly with access cards overnight, but the head of security is on it. Also, Dr. Haas from St. Bartholomew's left a message. He said, "Thank you for the heads up about the Santos boy. We'll take good care of him." Adrian paused midway through signing an authorization. Santos Irene checked her tablet. Mara Santos, janitorial, contracted through Silverline Facilities. She lifted a brow. He almost smiled despite himself. Irene was a vault who occasionally allowed herself an eyebrow as editorial. "You called in a favor I called," he said, as if that explained it. "Pull her file. I want to know if she's had any HR issues." "She hasn't," Irene said without looking. She had already pulled the file. "The good assistants lived 5 minutes ahead of you. No tardiness or disciplinary actions. 2 commendations from floor managers. 1 manager note, declines holiday parties, brings her own supplies, sings to herself while polishing glass." Irene's eyebrow rose a millimeter higher. "I'll send a fruit basket to the hospital." "Send flowers," Adrian said, surprising himself with the word. "And tell security I want an answer on the access anomaly." The answer arrived before lunch, carried in by Chief of Security O'Neill, a big man with careful hands. He placed 3 printouts on the desk. The footage stills were all angles and grayscale. An anonymous figure in a baggy jacket moved past the prototype lab's entrance at 1:12 a.m. A hood shadowed the face, but the badge swipe was clear. Santos, M. O'Neill said. Her card opened the door. Adrian stared at the stills. There was a thinness to the wrists, a looseness to the gait that did not match Mara's quiet, steady way of walking, even in fear. The camera caught a flash of sneakers white with a black stripe. He closed his eyes a heartbeat, measured the weight of information, forming a conclusion. "Suspend her pending investigation," he said, and it came out colder than he intended. "But don't make a spectacle. She's at the hospital. I don't want security at her door." Irene hesitated, understood. "Also," he said, staring at the photo, "pull all badge clones from the last 2 months. Audit back-end logs. Check manufacturing floor networks for pings from outside IPs." He paused. "And get me Damien." Damien Cross, the CFO, walked into the office, smiling like a snake, practicing to be a friend. "Rough night, I hear," he said, crossing the room with casual ownership. He always walked as if he'd already won the argument. We've got the investors tomorrow. I'm reminding you to lead with the revenue projections and soften the timeline uncertainty. Adrian pointed at the stills. We may have an internal breach. Damien's expression slid smoothly from amusement to concern. He bent, tapped the paper with a groomed finger. Janitorial, he said. The word a delicate sneer. Outsourced. That's your first flaw. You want loyalty. You pay it in-house. But, of course, you know that. He glanced up. Well, we'll make a clean example. If people think they can lift prototypes, they will. Do you want me to draft a talking point for tomorrow in case this leaks? He disliked Damien in small ways, all day, and in large ones at night. No, Adrian said. No leaks. Oh. And if there is one, we find it before the investors do. He watched Damien leave and wondered when. Exactly. His company had grown into a mirror that showed him only the hardest parts of himself. That afternoon, after a board rehearsal that felt like a battle where both sides spoke in graphs, Adrian turned the car not toward his apartment but across town. St. Bartholomew's rose in yellow brick and history saints in stained glass. Nurses in comfortable shoes. He told himself he was checking on a favor. He told himself he was protecting the company's reputation by keeping a quiet situation quiet. But when he reached the pediatric ward and found the door with a hand-lettered sign, Mateo Santos, room 314, what he felt had nothing to do with reputation. Inside him, a small boy slept, cheeks damp with fever and exertion. An oxygen tube curved beneath his nose like a tiny parenthesis around breath. A girl, his twin, under the fierce halo of a ponytail, sat on the chair beside the bed, drawing a dragon that breathed stars instead of fire. Mara stood at the window, forehead pressed to the glass. When she saw Adrian, surprise flared, then caution, then something like gratitude tried to work its way past the bruise of a long night. You didn't need to come, she said. No, he agreed. But I did. Lucia looked up from her drawing, measured the expensive cut of his coat and the set of his mouth, and returned to adding more stars. Children have a keen sense for what matters. The boy exhaled a rustle of air that rasped against the room's quiet. Machines made polite noises. The head of pediatrics said to tell you thank you. Mara said, he said you're very generous. He held in the reflex to correct, to say it was a phone call, not generosity. Is your son better? She said. A prayer and a report. He's stubborn. He gets that from me. She looked at her daughter, whereas Lucia gets her good sense. Lucia grinned without looking up. I get my good sense from Mrs. Rivera. She says some men are like locked doors and you need the right key, but we can't afford keys. So we just keep knocking. Adrian found his mouth tilting upward. Mrs. Rivera sounds formidable. She is, Mara said. If you ever need soup or advice shouted across a stairwell. She's your woman. He nodded, tracked the gentle rise and fall of Mateo's chest, the way illness makes a god of a humble breath. He should leave, he told himself. He had an investor presentation and a breach investigation and a son who would line up his cars tonight and wait for a father who was late. But he stayed 1 minute more, listening to the soft mechanical sighs, the huff and hush of the heating vents, the delicate instrument the world becomes when a child is unwell. Then his phone vibrated with a message from Irene. Suspension notice, drafted, need your signature. He closed his eyes. He did not want to sign it while looking at this boy. He did not want to think about a grayscale image and a badge that told a story he did not yet trust. "I need to ask you something," he said, and when Mara looked at him, he felt the floor tilt a degree. "Were you at the tower at 1:15 this morning, so?" she said, slow and careful and true. "I left at 1. I took the train. I ran the last 4 blocks because the siren was loud." Her mouth tried to be brave. "Why?" he exhaled. "Security flagged your badge at 1:12. For a moment, the room held its breath. 2. Lucia's pencil stopped moving. The little green monitor by the bed blinked its steady pulse. "My badge," Mara said. And bewilderment turned in her voice like a small screw, then fear. That swift understudy stepped forward. I put it in my locker at 12:45. I forgot it in my pocket at first, and then I remembered, and I would never, sir. I would never." She pressed the heel of her hand between her ribs as if to keep her heart from spilling. "They suspended me. Pending review," he said, hating the phrase, even as he used it. "We're investigating. I told them not to make a scene." She nodded. She didn't cry this time. She just looked down at her hands, palms up as if searching for the missing evidence of her life. "I can prove it," she said. "Mrs. Monrivera, the ambulance, the train camera. I'll bring you everything. I can't lose this job." He thought of prototypes that cost more than apartments, and a boy whose breath could buy 1,000 apartments and still be priceless. He thought of justice, which was easy on paper until it had a face. "Bring me everything," he said. "We'll find the truth." And then he did what he would have sworn the morning before he did not know how to do. He took his time leaving. The truth, when it wants to hide, dresses itself in plausibility. For 2 days, the company moved like a machine. Meetings slid into meetings. Numbers collided gently like billiard balls. And beneath it all, a dark current ran. Word of the suspension spread through the whispers like smoke through vents. Some voiced sympathy for the cleaner. Others shrugged and said, "You never can tell. People do desperate things." The investor demo swelled to a performance Adrian on stage in a light that painted hard angles across his face, the prototype alive in his palm like a promise. Applause stitched itself together dutifully. Camera shutters ticked, but between sentences, he saw Mara's palm and the bruised halo of fear around her eyes. Between handshakes, he pictured a locker with a badge glinting like misplaced trust. O'Neill's report on badges landed on his desk with a blunt thud. There were 3 clone attempts in the last month, O'Neill said, gray brows drawn together. "All failed, supposedly, but I found a gap in the logs between 12:58 and 1:16 last night. No entries. That's not a black hole you get from power flickers." He slid another photo across the desk, a still of a slender figure in a hooded jacket, stepping into a shadow around a corner where the ceiling camera's view broke. The camera caught the edge of a hand tattoo, a small black geometrics pattern like a triangle tucked in a circle. "Employees?" Adrian asked. "Not that I know," O'Neill said, "but some of the third-party contractors, they rotate, hard to track. Hard to track isn't acceptable," Adrian said, an old impatience sharpening his tone. O'Neill didn't flinch. Good men never did. Pull employment records for Silver Line facilities. Cross-check tattoos on social media. I want names. While O'Neill went hunting, Mara went gathering. She arrived at the tower lobby the next afternoon wearing the same uniform. Chin high, eyes steady. A white envelope clutched like a talisman. Security guard Felicia recognized her and tipped her head with a sympathy held inside professionalism. They told me you can bring paperwork to HR. Felicia murmured. I'll buzz you through. Mara nodded her thanks, shoulders squared. In the envelope, the hospital intake, time-stamped 1:07 a.m., the neighbor's statement, I, Rosa Rivera, swear on my husband may he rest. The siren took him at 12:58, and she was already running. The transit card record that showed her swiping into the Jefferson station at 12:43 a.m. It's all here, she told Irene when they met outside the HR glass cube. Irene read efficiently, then slower, then looked up with her own armor dented. I'll take this to Miss Vale, Irene said, and for what it's worth. Miss Santos, I believe you. Belief doesn't pay rent, Mara said quietly, then immediately regretted the hardness of the sentence. I'm sorry. Thank you. She left the building with the feeling of someone who had done an exam fully and still wasn't sure she'd passed. On the sidewalk, the city exhaled exhaust and impatience. She checked her phone. Lucia's text. We made a get well banner. Mommy with 50 exclamation points that were somehow exactly the right number. She smiled and then pressed 2 fingers to her lip, like saving the kiss for when everything calmed inside the tower. Irene placed the envelope on Adrian's desk. He opened it, absorbed each timestamp the way a parched man counts drops. He felt that familiar cognitive gear shift, the part of his brain designed to analyze companies, turning its lens to a person. Facts lined up. 12:43. Subway swipe. 12:58. Ambulance departure. 1:07 hospital intake. The badge swipe at 1:12. After she'd already arrived, it didn't fit. A hand tattoo that didn't fit. A gap in the logs that didn't fit. He could feel the puzzle wanting to click, but 2 pieces were missing. He buzzed O'Neill. We're looking at a fabrication or a clone. Find who had physical access to the badge racks last night, and cross-check that hand tattoo against Silverline's temporary hires. By dusk, O'Neill had a name, Tyler Mendez, 26, temporary maintenance hire through Silverline 2 weeks earlier, previous suspended gig for theft. More importantly, a public Instagram featuring a small black geometric tattoo on the left wrist, a triangle in a circle, in a photo taken 2 days earlier. Tyler lifted a beer, tattoo visible. He wore white sneakers with a black stripe. O'Neill looked grim. We pulled door logs from the loading bay. His code registered at 12:30 a.m. He left at 1:20, but his badge never hit the prototype floor. If he piggybacked through with a cloned access and then stayed to the blind spots, he could have used someone else's badge and left with a secondary staircase. Arrest him, Adrian said. Already called it in. O'Neill said, NYPD is sending a unit. For a moment, relief rose like a tide. Then a second truth came shouldering in somewhere. Someone had given Tyler the idea, the access, the nerve. You don't breach a company like Vale Systems with a maintenance temp and Instagram bravado. You need a green light, even a quiet one. Adrian's gaze drifted, not by logic, but by instinct, to the window where the city lay in hungry squares. He thought of Damien's careful smiles. He thought of budgets trimmed around the edges that made third-party contractors cheaper, then convenient, then inevitable. He thought of his own choices, boomeranging with ugly grace. That night, the call came at 11:18 p.m., like bad news likes to keep. Irene again, voice honed to its slender steel. They arrested Mendez. She said he had a set of swipe cards in his apartment, a skimmer, and a Veil Systems fob printed with Santos. He's not talking about where the prototype is, but she paused. A rare break, but they found a transfer in his bank account from a Shell LLC incorporated last year in Delaware. Guess who sits on its board of advisors under a pseudonym? Damien, Adrian said, and the word was a stone he was tired of lifting. Damien, Irene confirmed. The LLC also paid a Silverline supervisor last Friday. For a moment, silence unfurled between them. Not the peaceful kind. This was the silence that fills a theater before the stage floor drops. Lock down Damien's systems access. Adrian said, freeze the LLC funds if we can. And thank you. Irene, go be with your son, she said softly before hanging up. Surprising him, he didn't remember telling her he was at home. Maybe good assistants always knew where you were. He went to Theo's room. The boy lay turned toward the window, cars aligned at attention near his fingers. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed without disturbing the formation. Streetlight washed the room in a pale smear. There's a boy named Mateo, he said into the hush. He had trouble breathing. He's okay now. His mom cleans the offices at night. She got blamed for something she didn't do. People will fix it, but it will take time. Theo's eyes flickered. He seemed to be listening to some weather only he heard. Does he have a dragon? He asked at last. Voice paper cut small. He might, Adrian said. His sister draws him stars. Theo considered. We can give him one car, he said, struggling with the arithmetic of generosity and attachment. You can choose, Adrian said. And when Theo fell asleep, tiny hand resting on a red Matchbox convertible, Adrian stayed a while, the empire finally quiet. In the morning, before dawn, a message from Irene Mendez is cooperating. Prototype hidden in a locker at the bus terminal. Police retrieved. He names the Shell LLC and the man with clean shoes who told him where to stand and when. He never met the man in light, always by text and envelopes. Adrian had once admired how cleverly corruption learned to speak in whispers. On his desk, the suspension notice for Mara waited, the signature line like an accusation. He tore it in half, then into smaller pieces, then into confetti that fell like tired snow. He thought of calling her and telling her what he was about to do, then decided against it. He wanted to look her in the eye when he said the words. He took the elevator down to the lobby and stepped into the winter morning, breath blooming in front of him, somewhere across town. A boy exhaled more easily, somewhere across the hall. A CFO counted money in other people's names, and in the middle stood Adrian, a man who could spend millions and still not buy one kind, necessary thing if he did not change. The arrest of Tyler Mendez landed in the business pages like a pebble, faintly troubling a lake, but inside Veil Systems, it was an earthquake that walked on tiptoe. O'Neill closed loop after loop. Irene undid knots with email threads and legal filings. The police picked up the Silverline supervisor, who crumbled, naming the shell company with a wince. Damien didn't come to work. That was the first twist, a not surprising one, but still. The chair at the CFO's table sat empty like a tooth pulled without anesthesia. Adrian authorized the lawyers to act. Freeze accounts. Seize devices. The empire turned its cannons inward. He could have delegated the next conversation, but he didn't. He took the car to Mara's neighborhood himself. Mrs. Rivera's building had a stairwell that smelled like onion and rain. He climbed 3 floors and found the door with a crayon drawing of a sun taped to it. He knocked. The chain slid. The door opened to reveal Lucia. suspicious in a way that made him want to earn trust properly. I brought this, he said, holding up a cardboard box. It's not much. Soup, from a place that pretends to understand soup like your neighbor does. Lucia considered the box, then looked over her shoulder. Mommy, she called. It's the man with the expensive coat. Mara appeared, hair pulled up, sleeves pushed, the armor of a woman in motion. When she saw Adrian, she flinched, a response learned from a world where men in suits brought trouble wrapped in words like, we regret, and unfortunately, Mr. Vale. Adrian, he said before he could stop himself. Please, may I come in? She hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment held the narrow dignity of the working poor, 2 mugs with cartoon astronauts drying on a dish towel, a sofa that had learned 2 children's shapes. Matteo lay on a pillow fortress, reading a book about a dragon who refused to breathe fire and instead learned to make tea. Hi, Matteo said, cautious but polite. Hi, Adrian said. I like your dragon. He's stubborn, Matteo confided. My sister says I am, too. Your sister sounds wise, Adrian said. And Lucia made a face that said, obviously. Mara accepted the soup and set it on the counter. Is this a courtesy call before bad news? Mr. Vale, she asked, her voice a polite blade. He shook his head. No, he said. It's an apology before better news. They used your badge. They cloned it. A temporary employee and a supervisor from Silverline did. They were paid by a shell company that our CFO secretly controlled. The words fell like bricks and like relief. You're reinstated with back pay and a raise, and we're offering you a permanent position, internal facilities manager for the nighttime floors, benefits, stability. You've more than earned it. For a second, she didn't move. Then her hand went to her mouth, and she sat down slowly, as if a greater gravity had pressed her to the chair. Lucia, who understood everything faster, threw her arms around her mother. Matteo folded himself in, his small fingers finding Mara's sleeve. Tears pricked Mara's eyes. She blinked hard. Thank you, she said, and the words were small but carried the weight of months. Adrian cleared his throat. There's more. He felt the next sentence gather. It would come out awkwardly. He would not let that stop it. Your hospital bills. The company will cover what insurance didn't. And he stared at the window, at the winter sunlight pretending to be warm. I'll set up a health fund for facility staff. Children with chronic illnesses. In your son's name, if that's okay. It should have been the end of the conversation, the neatly tied bow on a complicated package. But life, being less tidy and more interesting, lifted another corner. Mr. Vale, Mara said, voice unsteady. There's something I never told anyone, because it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. 3 years ago, I worked nights at St. Bartholomew's. Not as a cleaner, as a temp in patient services delivering meals, tidying rooms. Her eyes moved to a place across time. There was a woman on the oncology floor who always asked for the window open, even when it was snowing. She said the cold reminded her she was still here. She had hair like a storm and laughed like it wasn't going to run out. And she kept apologizing to the window for fogging it. I brought her tea one night and she was crying. She said her husband was tired and trying so hard to be strong that he forgot strength could be quiet. She said he needed someone to tell him it was okay to sit down. She looked back at him. Her name was Lila. The world tilted. The name unthreaded something deep. My wife, Adrian said. And then his voice did the strangest thing. It broke open in the middle. He gripped the back of the kitchen chair because the ground had become ocean. You knew her. I didn't know her, Mara said gently, but she told me she wrote a letter. She wasn't sure she'd be brave enough to give you. She asked me to leave it with the nurse at the station to mail if she didn't. Mara swallowed. I did. I handed it to the night nurse before my shift ended. I've always wondered if it reached you. Adrian stood very still. He had received a small, pale blue envelope a week after Lila's funeral, and, unable to bear the shape of her handwriting, he had slid it into a drawer, inside a box, inside a safe. He had carried it across 2 apartments and 1 tower and had never opened it. He thought of it now, the precise weight of that unchosen pain, and felt foolish and human and in love with a ghost all at once. I never opened it, he said, hearing his own confession like someone else's. I thought if I didn't, it would mean the last thing she wrote would still be waiting. Like a door I could someday walk through. That's not how doors work. He put his hand to his chest where a letter had been a lock. Thank you for telling me. There was another twist waiting at the door. As if the day had decided to keep folding. A knock. Mrs. Rivera bustled in without waiting for permission, the way family does. Soup, she announced triumphantly, then stopped when she saw Adrian holding a soup that was not hers. She narrowed her eyes at him, then nodded, approving his choice with the solemnity of a general reviewing troops. Good. I see you're learning. Then she turned conspiratorially to Mara. Also, the landlord posted a notice on the stairwell. She said, "Inspection tomorrow." You know what that means. Mara closed her eyes. He's fishing again. Always. Mrs. Rivera sighed, but I told him, if he knocked on your door during dinner, I would call my cousin who works in the council and his mother who works in heaven. Adrian watched the exchange, the way community made itself out of small threats and big kindness, and something in him cracked like ice under a foot, and then did not drown. Just found water. He made 2 calls on his way to the car. The first, to legal. Regarding the landlord, someone would explain tenant rights to him with the clarity of an expensive education. The second, to Irene. I'm going to be late, he said, and call maintenance. Ask them to open my office safe. He drove back to the tower through dirty snow and noise. In his office, he took out the blue envelope with his wife's handwriting and sat down the way someone sits before they choose to be honest. He slid a letter opener under the seal, paper side. The first line read, "My love. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say the small things slowly like I wanted." He didn't finish the line before tears flooded his vision, but he kept reading. A page and a page and a page, his heart a creature both wounded and relieved. And as he read, somewhere downtown, Damien walked into a bank and found his accounts frozen, his options thinning. He pulled out his phone and texted a number that replied with the digital equivalent of a door closing. Panic has a smell. By midnight, he had packed a bag. By morning, he had made a decision people like him make when they are sure the world owes them more than it gave. Snow fell hard enough to blur sirens. The morning turned to noon and then 5 p.m. It's the hour when impatience tangles with hunger and streets clog with returning hopes. At Vale Systems, employees trickled out like marbles from a jar. On the 37th floor, the prototype lab stood quiet. Alarms armed, lights on low. On the mezzanine level, a charity event crew prepared tables for a gala. Adrian had agreed to host weeks earlier. Tech for Tomorrow, a fundraiser for pediatric care at St. Bartholomew's. It was an odd confluence. Suits and champagne upstairs, Hard truths downstairs. Mara, back on the job with a new badge clipped to her collar and a small, experimental smile in the corner of her mouth, oversaw a crew polishing the glass until it forgot fingerprints existed. Edges. She reminded a new hire gently. People see the middle, they feel the edges. She thought of her children, at home with Mrs. Rivera stringing paper stars. She thought of Adrian reading a letter and felt a tenderness for a man she had decided, 48 hours earlier, never to think about beyond polite nods. Life is stubborn. It folds strangers into the pocket under your ribs and waits for you to notice. At 6:22 p.m., the fire alarm made a noise that shredded air. A second later, lights stuttered and died. Then emergency strips came to life like white veins. Training takes over when panic wants the stage. Mara shouted, "Elevators are outstairs. Stay together." She counted heads, moved toward the stairwell, felt the surge of bodies and the slap of 100 shoes. On the 15th floor, smoke unfurled under a server room door, like a dark animal waking. In the stairwell, a security guard yelled above the churn, "Short circuit. Possible arson in 37 server closet." The word arson moved through the building with an ugly grace. It knew where to go toward fear, toward exits. Adrian arrived minutes later to a scene that turned the tower into a beehive, where he demanded, grabbing O'Neill's arm. "Server closet," O'Neill said. Voice clipped. Multiple ignition points. "Cameras are out in that section. Someone tripped the failsafe. Fire suppression is kicking in. But there's a jam on the 13th floor stairwell door. People are bottlenecked. The kids' choir is here." A frazzled event planner cried. They came early for the sound check. They're on 14. Adrian's blood went cold and fast. He didn't know he was already moving until Irene shouted his name and shoved a fire escape keyring into his hand. "Take this," she said, "and for God's sake, don't be stupid. Be careful." He took the stairs 2 at a time, smoke teasing the edges of the air, a heat that whispered promise. On 14, a cluster of children with glittering bow ties and street coats clung to teachers. The stairwell door refused to budge. Something had warped in the heat, or a deliberate wedge held it. He slammed his shoulder into it. It groaned. Behind him, a child coughed, and the sound reached into the softest part of him. He braced, thrust again. The bolt gave like a blunted tooth. The door swung. "Go," he shouted, and the children moved like a river finally finding a path. On the landing, he saw Mara soot on her cheek like war paint, eyes bright with emergency. She had a child in her arms, a small girl with a cough like paper tearing. "We're clear down to 12, she said, "but there's one left." "Who?" he asked, and the answer made a chord ring through his bones and not stop. The boy. The one with the cars. Theo. Time became a drum, where he said, already imagining the map, "The mezzanine," she said. He came with the nanny to deliver a donation for the hospital. He got scared and slipped away. He went to the lookout platform by the glass stairs. I looked, but smoke chased us back. I couldn't. The confession tore at her. I couldn't get him. He put a hand on her shoulder, and for once, his touch wasn't instruction, it was communion. "I can," he said, "get these kids down." He turned, then turned back. "Mara," he said, tasting the name like a vow. "Lock the doors behind you. Count every head twice." He ran. Smoke thickened as he climbed. He clamped a wet handkerchief to his mouth. He had read that somewhere. He had listened to safety briefings with half an ear, and now all his sense was theirs. He reached the mezzanine, where the glass stairs crisscrossed like a sculpture. The air here had gone bad, an iron taste at the back of the throat. He crouched, do what they tell you. He thought, listen to people who spend their lives teaching others how not to die. Theo, he called. Voice rough. Buddy, it's Dad. For a second, only the building answered its clicks and low moans, its underbelly. Then, faint here, a small voice, not ghostly finally, but very human. He pivoted, in the corner, beneath the lip of a hospitality bar. Theo huddled with arms around his knees. Cars secreted in his jacket like talismans. His face streaked with soot, eyes huge, shock making him small. When he saw his father, something in him loosened the trust that a child keeps tucked away for emergencies. Adrian crossed the floor, feeling the heat, pressing the way a crowd presses. Hey, he said, and if he could have threaded all tenderness into the syllable, he would have. I have you. Theo shook his head. I dropped the red one, he said, voice wobbling on the edge of a chasm. I can't leave him. Adrian almost laughed because the world narrowed to the exactness of being 6. He searched the floor with his palm, soot painting his skin. He found the tiny car near the base of the bar. Its paint dulled, and he wanted to weep with gratitude for ridiculous things. He tucked the car into Theo's pocket. We're leaving, he said. Close your eyes if you need to. I'll count. They moved low along the wall. The building groaned a new note. Glass juddered, but held. The exit shimmered like a mirage. The last 10 steps stretched longer than years. Theo coughed, chest heaving, small body bucking against the harsh air. Breathe with me, Adrian said, and breathed in, deliberate. Slow counts, the way the therapist had shown him for panic. And his son matched him because children learn the tempo of a parent's heart before they learn the alphabet. They reached the stairwell as a spray of foam hissed from the ceiling suppression jets. Blessed clouds swallowing flame. On the landing 2 floors below, Mara appeared again. Of course she had. She had gotten the choir down and counted heads and counted them again and ignored security, telling her to stay outside because some people obey the law of their own mercy first. She took Theo's hand with a steadiness that made the world feel less wild. I've got him, she said. Get lower, crawl. They crawled. On 9, the smoke thinned to an aftertaste. On 6, Adrian's legs trembled in ways he hadn't experienced since he'd been young and poor enough to shake. On the lobby level, the doors burst to an air that smelled like sirens and wet wool. The night had risen to meet the emergency engines, drawing lines of red. Paramedics turning chaos into triage. Camera phones held aloft by strangers hungry for proof that danger had visited glory. On the curb, Theo pressed his face into his father's shirt and sobbed those deep, body-evicting sobs that reset a system. It's okay, Adrian said, words breaking, meaning them the way you mean a sacrament. It's okay. I'm here. A paramedic checked Theo's lungs and declared him more scared than harmed. Mara stood beside them. Hair damp, throat raw from shouting. They stared at each other like people who had touched the same wire and were now surprised to still be standing. He reached for her hand before he understood the impulse. She reached back like she already had. A detective strode over, expression hard with satisfaction. We've got a suspect on 37 on the camera now, she said. He tripped a different feed in the electrical room, tried to set a delay. He's in a suit. He's bleeding. Looks like he slipped. She looked at Adrian. Your CFO is about to be very unlucky. Adrian turned to see Damien, face pale, hair damp with sweat, being led out in handcuffs, his clean shoes scuffed at last. When their eyes met, Damien smirked, something that wanted to be a threat, and landed like a whimper. Adrian felt no triumph, only a quiet, fierce clarity that was cousin to love, the desire to protect, to repair, to set the world a little straighter than he found it. The tower survived. The fire suppression, miracle of engineering and lawsuit avoidance, did its job. Damage confined itself to the server closet and a corridor that smelled like scorched math. Insurance adjusters turned up like crows. Reporters fed on whatever they could scavenge. The gala was canceled and rescheduled, then reimagined as a community thank you dinner for first responders and hospital staff. Irene planned it with the calm intensity of someone who relaxes by alphabetizing crises. Damien, wrists finally as constrained as his ethics had always been, was charged with arson, conspiracy, and more poetic sins the law didn't list. The Shell LLC unraveled like cheap thread. Silverline found itself sued into a soul and then rebuilt with better contracts and union oversight. O'Neill slept 5 hours over 3 days and smiled once with his whole mouth. The morning after the fire, Adrian knocked on Mara's door with 2 things tucked under his arm, a slab of paper for official use, and a small, pale blue envelope with edges softened by time. He would not outsource this. He would not turn this into bullet points. Mara opened the door in an oversized sweater. Lucia peered around her mother's hip. Mateo wore a paper firefighter hat he had made at school with a pride that made his ears glow. "Good morning," Mara said. The words warmed by a relief that had finally let itself into the apartment. "Good morning," Adrian said, and the phrase felt new in his mouth, like something he could get used to. He offered the slab of paper. "This is the permanent offer, facilities manager for nights, with transition to days after training, if you prefer. Benefits that don't require you to choose between medicine and groceries. We'll cover daycare if you need it." He held out the envelope, humbled. "And this is Lila's letter. If you want to know what she wrote, I thought maybe we could read it together, or I could tell you the part that concerns you." Mara touched the envelope like it might be fragile and eternal at once. "I'd like both," she said, and stepped aside. "Come in." They sat at the small table that had hosted years of breakfasts and negotiations about bedtime. He slid the letter out and read Lila's handwriting aloud, voice slipping, catching, continuing. The words were simple and larger than themselves. "I love you. You are trying so hard. Let gentleness into the house. Don't make monuments to grief. Make breakfast. Let someone help you. Find the living and love them as if the future is not a rumor. If I can haunt you at all, I'll come as laughter at the worst moments and the smell of rain in rooms with no windows." When he finished, the room was quiet, the way a church is quiet when belief hasn't left, but the ceremony has. Mara's eyes glistened. She was very wise. She said she was. Adrian said, "I forgot how to let anyone in. I punished my son with my competence." The confession tasted like iron and sunlight. And now Mara asked softly, "And now?" He said, "I am going to be brave in the small ways. I'm going to pick up my kid from school on Tuesdays. I'm going to learn the names of everyone who empties the trash cans and pays for the things you don't see. I'm going to make soup badly and keep trying. I'm going to build a fund so parents don't hold their breath while the city chooses who can afford care. And I'm going to ask if I can walk with you a while, however you want that to look. Mara smiled, and it started small and then lit her whole face because some choices are like light switching on line by line. We can start with soup, and with you telling Theo that dragons can breathe tea. They did start with soup, and it was mediocre and full of love. Theo, invited that evening after school, arrived with his red car and 3 facts about dragons he delivered like press releases. He sat beside Mathieu on the rug, solemnly traded cars for crayons, and later fell asleep on the sofa with the unperformative trust of the young. Lucia taught Adrian how to tape paper stars to walls without peeling paint. Mrs. Rivera supervised, approved, and left a Tupperware with stew that would ruin Adrian forever for restaurants that media called elevated. He watched the night unfurl across a window with curtains instead of a skyline, and he felt a peace that had nothing to prove. At Vale Systems, the Tech for Tomorrow dinner took place as a thank you instead of a brag. Nurses in comfortable shoes ate steak under chandeliers. Firefighters with red-rimmed eyes laughed like boys for a minute and then cried like men for a different minute and were not ashamed. A child from the choir sang a song about hope that didn't tremble. Adrian spoke briefly, not as a man accepting applause, but as someone distributing it. He called people by their names as if that were the business model. He announced the Santos Fund for child health for staff families, and it landed in the room like something that should have existed forever. When he sat down, Irene patted his arm once, as if he had finally returned from a country where work is the only language. In the weeks that followed, reality put its shoes back on. Bills came and were paid. The elevator in Mara's building broke and was fixed. Theo had a tantrum about a broken Lego and worked it out in the way of hearts, learning a new grammar. Adrian found himself at an elementary school assembly, clapping for a recorder solo that sounded like a musical instrument had chosen to learn how to breathe. He did not check his phone. He did not apologize for taking up an hour. He bought cupcakes and forgot to bring forks, and everyone survived. He discovered there is a humility to cutting frosting with the side of a spoon. One night, the 4 of them 5. When you count Lucia's insistence on the plant Clementine as a family member stood on the roof of the apartment building under a sky of February pins. The city threw light like confetti. The river sulked. The wind pressed cold kisses. "Do you miss the view from up there?" Mara asked, nodding toward his tower. He thought about it. The way the glass made everything distant and manageable. The way it made him feel the shape of his loneliness so clearly he could pretend it was design. "Sometimes," he said, "but this view has people in it." She took his gloved hand. He threaded his fingers through. They stood in the honest cold and did not make it into a metaphor. Below them, the city kept beating its messy, gorgeous drum behind them in the stairwell. Mrs. Rivera called up, "Come down before you forget you have blood." They went down laughing. In the hallway, Lucia dragged them to show a banner she had made with Mateo. "Welcome home." It read, unintentionally and perfectly plural. Later, when the twins were asleep, and Theo had been carried to the spare bed, when dishes caught the kitchen light and the apartment sighed into its nighttime rhythm, Adrian took the letter from Lila and placed it back in its envelope. He put it in a drawer, not a vault, not a safe, just a drawer that smelled like cinnamon and pencil shavings. He kissed his fingertips and pressed them to the paper. Then he looked at Mara. "She told me to let gentleness into the house," he said. You did. Mara shook her head. You did. She said, You opened the door. He thought of the first night, the marble, the siren, a woman crying and standing up anyway. He thought of a building that tried to become a furnace and failed. He thought of bad men with clean shoes and good women with quiet spines. He thought of how truth had hidden inside suspicion and then decided to be found outside somewhere. A bus sighed. A radiator clanked. In the softer map of their lives, two boys slept, and a girl dreamed of stars. A dragon could breathe without burning anything. He reached for Mara's hand across the table, and she took it like a promise she was willing to keep, under a city that never stopped taking itself too seriously. 3 adults and 3 children carved out a small republic where soup mattered. Letters were read, and people who were cold learned to stand closer. The billionaire softened, the cleaner was honored. The family, however unconventional, decided it did not care much for the word unconventional. It cared for laughter at bad moments, for the smell of rain in rooms without windows, for the ordinary miracle of getting to have tomorrow together. And when morning came, as it stubbornly does, the light found them ready.